A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
A new book has just been released. It tells the stories of devastated parents and medical practitioners and politicians about the horrors of deceiving children into believing they can be the opposite sex. Now, this book contains the accounts of 9 families whose lives have been devastated by what is considered to be the betrayal of government policies and the health system and our education systems. Kirralie Smith leads Binary and this new book called Devastated: How Gender Ideology is Tearing Australian Families Apart. Kirralie Smith, welcome back to 2020.
Thanks for having me again, Neil.
Well, Kirralie, congratulations on the launch of this book. It's been a little while in the making, but now it's there and it's a resource for parents and for listeners to our conversation today.
Absolutely, Neil. It's taken us nearly all year, and it's been a very harrowing project because we're dealing with real families who are still experiencing the very raw and vulnerable experience of having children captured by this gender ideology. And we've needed to tread very carefully and express and be a voice for these parents who have been so voiceless in this whole political environment and, been really betrayed by the education and health systems in many, many ways.
You know, these days, it's almost as though everyone knows someone or you're being served by someone at a counter. But, of course, whether it's adults or children, it's really the children that you're most concerned about here because they're the ones that you're suggesting have been families devastated here. But it's children at the centre of this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. These stories are both of boys and girls, and they're families like yours and mine, just parents and siblings who want the best for their kids. They send their children to school when the children have had usually very different underlying issues, such as being on the spectrum or autism or trauma or bullying. The parents have done what you and I would do. They've taken their children to psychologists or psychiatrists or their GP. They've talked to school counsellors. They've followed the processes that each one of us would normally follow. But every step along the way, they've been betrayed, where schools have hidden information from the parents, or the medical practitioners have said one thing to the parents and something totally different to the children. And they've affirmed the children's confusion and incongruence and really deceived the parents along the way, and it's just heartbreaking to read these stories now.
When you say a parent fronts up at their school or they go to their GP and then they go to their psychologist, they're getting some counselling from somewhere because they don't know where to go, what to do, are you saying that this betrayal extends to the fact that lots of those in the whole mix have been having to affirm these children in their chosen identity?
That's exactly what I'm saying. These parents have been accused of being transphobic, bigoted. Several of them have been told, wouldn't you rather have a live son than a dead daughter? They've been told that the only way to save their child is to give them harmful puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, and the consequences have been absolutely devastating physically, emotionally, spiritually and mentally for these children and for the parents. And it's been, watching these dominoes fall where, as I said, parents have tried to do the right thing, but schools or government agencies have intervened and removed children from some families, have accused families of, being abusive just simply because the parent wants to affirm the actual biological state of their child instead of going along with a confusion or an incongruence that can never be affirmed, no matter how many drugs or surgeries that child takes.
So you've got real stories from 9 Australian families. So they're not just sort of cherry-picked from around the world. These are actual Aussie families. There's some things that these families have in common. How do you describe some of the stories as they unfold?
Look, absolutely. And the things that are common are definitely, as I indicated earlier, with things like the child being on the spectrum, being bullied, or having some sort of trauma in their life. And then nearly all of them had way too much exposure online, were groomed online, or in their schools through drama classes in particular, and getting involved in a crowd or a group, usually online, that's then allowed that child to have phrases and access to tools that separate them from their own parents and enable them to get access to medical practitioners who will affirm their gender confusion.
So you're a parent, you're looking for help, you think about your school, you think about a psychologist, you go to a medical practitioner, and the activities around that are really actively separating your children from you as a family. So no wonder there are parents who are feeling betrayed here.
Oh, absolutely. And while it might be 9 stories in the book, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of families experiencing this around the country. We've already had so many people contact us, both before and after publishing the book, to say that they're experiencing exactly the same thing. And thankfully, Professor Diana Kenny contributed 2 chapters to the book, and she has some really practical tools in there of how to recognise what's going on and steps that you can take to support your child through their difficult puberty years. And most of us had difficult puberty years, but it doesn't have to result in your child being put on very harmful drugs or pathways that are going to cause irreversible damage.
Okay, so there's stories there of these 9 families and their feeling of betrayal, but you've also included in the book ways that you can take, pathways that you can go, which are going to protect your family potentially, ultimately, if these things get to the nth degree. Hey, let me ask you about politicians, because are they going to be the recipients of this new book? Because I think a lot of people will be saying, don't just give us a book as parents. What about getting this into the hands of legislators and decision makers? Are your books going into their inboxes?
Yes, they are. 150 federal politicians already have the book. We launched the book in Parliament House during the last sitting week, and every politician received a copy. Whether they read it is now a whole other thing. And many state politicians have also received the book. And so I really encourage your listeners to contact their federal representatives and say, look, you were given this book, Devastated. It's the stories of 9 families who have been caught up in gender ideology. Please read it over the break, because action needs to be taken that will protect these vulnerable young people from irreversible harm.
So your federal MP in your local electorate has received a copy, and so if you were meeting them on the street corner and said, hey, did you read that book that came from Binary? You know the name Kirralie Smith. Did you read about those 9 families? Then they should know that they've received that copy of that book. Hey, you had the launch, Kirralie, at Parliament House in Canberra. It was on the last sitting day of the parliamentary year. Senator Alex Antic was a part of that. There's a number of politicians who've been right behind this book.
Yes, look, we have been greatly encouraged by an increasing number of politicians from, many different parties, with the Liberal Party, the National Party, the Libertarians, One Nation, and other independents in particular. And Dr. David Gillespie, who is a Nationals federal member, he came and gave a fantastic speech at the launch. He's been in medical practice for 33 years. He's also been a politician, and he couldn't emphasise strongly enough how important it is for people to voice their concerns to their local MPs, because they are being smashed every single day with issues, across the board, and it's the squeaky wheel that will get the oil. So please contact your local politicians and ask them to read this book, and then follow it up and ask them what are they going to do about it.
And some of us might be thinking, well, those politicians, they've had their last sitting of Parliament for the year. Aren't they just on a beach putting their feet up and sipping on a cocktail? Do politicians read their emails? Do they take calls from their constituents through what we might consider a summer, Christmas, New Year break?
Well, who knows? Those worth their salt certainly will, but it's worth a try. So, and I would encourage people, don't just send an email. Please make a phone call and even make an appointment to see your MP early in the new year. or before Christmas if you can get in before then, and have this very important conversation with them, because too many children have been harmed, too many families have been torn apart, and we need to stop it now. We know that around the world, in the UK and Nordic countries, even in New Zealand, they've stopped the use of these harmful drugs and these affirmation pathways because there's no data to back the use of such drugs, and in fact there's increasing evidence that it's doing more harm than good, and it's about time our politicians took this seriously and allowed there to be inquiries into this very, very harmful ideology.
You might be thinking, who can I get this book into the hands of someone who's important, who makes decisions? You're saying federal MPs will already have a copy. What about state MPs? What about community leaders? What about the media across the nation? Is there some ways that listeners can make use of this resource in their own local community to be able to be an influence?
Absolutely. And like I said, only some state MPs at this stage have got the book. So please speak to your state MP and get a copy for them if they don't already have one. Definitely leaders, church leaders, community leaders, educators really need to read this book to understand what's happening in family homes. And just your friends and family, your networks need to know that they're not alone. I can't tell you how many people reach out to me and say they feel so alone. Even contributors to this book were just amazed at the other contributors because they had been so isolated in this whole journey because they've been called names like transphobic and bigoted and hateful and uncaring when, in fact, they're anything but. They're the most kind, compassionate, loving parents you could ever wish to meet.
Well, it's a bit of a triumph. The book is out, and there'll be some listeners who are saying that's the sort of resource I've been waiting for, something to share with those community, state, those federal leaders. You can get a hold of it. It's called Devastated: How Gender Ideology is Tearing Australian Families Apart. And undoubtedly, you'll recognise there's Christian foundations in there too. You can go to the Binary website, binary.org.au, and you know what? You could become an email subscriber while you're there. There's more than 100,000 on that email subscriber list. But also check out that book, Devastated: How Gender Ideology is Tearing Australian Families Apart. You might be asked for a donation to get your copy, but it might be well worth it. Kirralie Smith leads Binary. Kirralie, thanks so much for your update today on 2020.
Thanks for having me again, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.